My name is David Mott. I am from Alameda. My family were very active with the Aeolian Yacht Club, which was primarily a sailing boat club. And back when I first arrived here in Steamboat Slough, which was 1941, was during the annual Aeolian Yacht Club cruise up here to Steamboat Slough. And at that time, to be a little positive in a statement, the store across the road here on the water side of the levee was then called Axel's Landing. And Axel's Landing was a little store, and then you would go in there and you would go around the counter of the store and go through an archway. In the back there was a soda fountain and a little room or dance floor and the like, which was very popular with us kids then. And then just before you went in to the that area and back, there was another archway opening to a small room to the north. And if you look at some of these pictures, you can see that small room butting out of the building. And in that room, it was full of slot machines. And you could go in there and play the slot machines, nickels, dimes, quarters, and what have you. And the slot machines were operated by some gambling entrepreneurs out of Walnut Grove who took care of them. But they were pretty good slot machines, because I can remember ending up with pockets full of nickels from going in there and playing the slot machines. So anyhow, and that was Axel's Landing. The sign out in front said Axel's Landing, and as far as I'm concerned, it was Axel's Landing at that time. So that was 1941. And so unfortunately, we couldn't come up here in 1942 because in 1942 was after Pearl Harbor, and at that time you were not allowed to take your pleasure boats out into San Francisco Bay. We were limited to just in the estuary people in Alameda. 1943, we were able to return to Steamboat Slough, which we did. And at that time, the popular place to anchor was along the river up here. And the trees provided the optimum shade, was the desirable thing for tying up on the river. Whereas in the slough, the wind blew down through there more, and you didn't get the shade that you had here on the river. 1942, I can't remember anything particular about it except for the fact that there was then a big packing shed across on the other side of the river from here. But the most important thing that I remember about the 40s was the river and the sloughs were all loaded with trees and other natural growth on the water. So there was lots of areas, or the whole route from here, for example, you drive to Walnut Grove, the levee all the way along had trees in it, like we still see here. And so that's an important thing as far as my memory is concerned, is about the trees. And the late 40s, there became a lot of activity on the part of the Army engineers, etc., that think they should remove the trees from the river and the sloughs. And a lot of that was done, and then the banks were rocked, as you see today. I remember so clearly, for example, just sitting on the boat and looking across there, all trees. Now you look over there and you can count the trees on your fingers, all that were there. Well, what happened, and I can't tell you what the date was, but we had then, by that time, become very close with the Peck family and with Bud in particular. And Bud was very proud of the trees that were on the levee bordering his property, and he wanted them to be retained. And he spearheaded a lot of politicking with these boaters that would tie up here, who came from the Bay Area and elsewhere and had varying degrees of influence to help him in stopping the trees being removed on this property and have it look like it looks across the river right now. And that was, I didn't participate in that, but I can remember my parents involved in it, and Bud would arrange some meeting with somebody politically involved in Sacramento, and my mother and many, many other ladies of their age, etc., would all come to Sacramento and meet with Bud, and they go in and see Senator so-and-so or whatever it is. And of course, I look back at it and I think, geez, that poor senator with all these women who are all worked up about keeping these trees descend on their office, and they're all talking at once, you know, and what can be done about it? Well, the remarkable thing about it is that the trees are still here. And while this area here that we love so much, which was from the slough up to where the trees now end, has been thinned a couple years ago and changed it some from what it was, but it's still here. And so I wanted to make a little bit of emphasis about how important it was that the effort was made to keep the trees here at Steamboat Slough at least. Unfortunately, if you want me to tell a little bit more about history of things, as I said earlier, the popular place for the boaters was to tie up along the river here, and there'd be boats just literally bow to stern almost along here, you know, in late July and August. And it was popular for that reason. It became unpopular when the Orville Dam was completed. And when Orville Dam was completed, the current in the river in the summer changed drastically. And how it changed is the river currents increased. And it increased because of the fact that the goddamn canals got built going from the South Delta on down into the South San Joaquin River, South San Joaquin Valley. And the purpose then, with the water that was available behind Orville and of course Shasta, they increased the current in the summertime through here. And then we lost one of the nice attributes here of July and August, when before that happening, the currents were low. You could get in your boat, you're into the water up here, and you'd have a nice swim down to the beach because there was a nice easy current. If you wanted to go the other way, young people, we could swim against the current because it was slow. After that started with the movement of water south, the current never stopped going downstream out here, and I don't think it's stopped today. And therefore, many people then started to go down the slough because the current was lesser in the slough. And that made a big difference to our feelings about up here. I want to make a comment about the champion of this area as far as retaining its feeling and all that, and that's Bud Peck. Bud Peck was a wonderful man and a very capable guy, and he enjoyed the boaters coming up here. Bud would get up early in the morning and do his chores with respect to the ranch, and of course in late July and August was generally harvest time for the pears. But Bud usually got everything done about 3 o'clock, and he was in his bathing suit, and he was over there on the beach checking on the young ladies who were hanging out there, etc. Bud was a photographer, as Tim mentioned earlier. And I can't remember when, but it was late 40s or 50s, Bud bought a Mercury speedboat. And the last time I heard, the Mercury speedboat is still down here in the barn. Nice mahogany inboard boat and water skiing. And so Bud, to further endear him to others, including the young ladies on the beach, he was providing for water skiing for anybody who was interested. And I was interested in that, and I also was a pretty good boat operator, so Bud liked me to come along, and I could run the boat, and he could take pictures of the members of the beach who were out there behind us. And he was taking lots of pictures of these gals learning to ski behind the boat, but he was on the boat. So one day he said to me, before you start towing Susie or whoever it was that we were going to do, take me over right there, someplace. He points. And that goddamn Bud, he get over there and we stop, and he jumps out of the boat with the camera, and he gets in the water, no life preserver or anything, and he treads water, and the water line is right here, and here he is with the camera, see? And so he says, now, okay, go and make some passes by here. You know, so I get out there and I get the gal up on the water skis and whatever, and then we go by Bud, and he's taking the pictures of them all the time, treading water and holding the camera out of the water. Usually then, I look back and see Bud after we made a pass or two, and I see like this, he's getting tired, you see. So I had to go and pick him up and get him out of the water before he and the camera went under. So that was a great memory of that. Bud was a wonderful person. I get very emotional, I guess, just thinking about him. We did a lot of traveling, he and I, and later on when I got married, we traveled with Bud. We helped Bud romance Lucille and ended up marrying Lucille, and we had great times with him then. The sad thing about it, though, is, in my mind, it's still outstanding here at Steamboat, but it ain't like it used to be. And it ain't like it used to be, I think, primarily is because of the things that have been done to the river as a result of whatever it is, the growth of our population, the trying to steal the water, etc. And if you loved the times you had up here, you better continue to oppose some of these plans that are being tossed around now as far as what's done with the water in Northern California. And so those are just some of the things that are so meaningful for you. My main points is it was Axel's Landing in the early 40s over there. 2, it was wonderful for a 10-year-old or 11-year-old to be able to go in there and play the slot machines with real money, etc. And then we had lots of good times that have been described earlier with the store on this side when it got created. I didn't realize until today that that store on this side was a building moved up there. I kind of thought that got built from the ground up, but anyhow, what's being built today is fantastic, and I just hope that a lot of people find it and make it successful for you, Tim, because you've done a beautiful job of creating a something about it here.
Being bosom buddies, and the fact that in their cameras, in their films and all that I put on DVDs, you never see the same gal in the photographs. They're always different. They're always very young, nice-looking girls. And as testimony to that fact, this is a photo of Bud at the beach, romancing whomever. I have no idea who this is, but this is just atypical of what went on. He was quite the bachelor until he got hooked. But, you know, with the airplane he had and the little mahogany boat that you talked about and whatnot, you know, he had all the tools to, you know, court whomever. So he did quite well in that department, I believe. Back to the trees.
I think he liked all those young ladies. I think the young ladies kind of liked Bud and what Bud had,
yep,
and what have you. And I think all of a sudden along the way, the current would change. Bud all of a sudden realized that he wasn't the aggressor anymore, and he was being aggressed. And he was a little afraid that maybe he would get too involved, and so he would back away. And he was a talented one to go and pick up a new one, you know, to be interested in. But Lucille finally nailed him. That was a great relationship, I think.
And one other footnote about the trees. Bud loved this river to no end. When he was real young, that with all the trees on the levees, it was no problem to go out there and go skiing nude. Wasn't a problem. And I guess they did that quite regularly. Beyond that, when this whole thing about rocking the levees came into vogue and all this with the Corps of Engineers, Bud worked very hard, as Dave said, to maintain the trees here on the slough and on the Sacramento River. And he and Senator Rada, and I don't remember the president of the San Francisco Yacht Club at that time, I could find out, but Senator Rada and the president of the San Francisco Yacht Club, and Bob Kirtland Sr., who was up in Clarksburg. I see those guys in photographs all the time, and they're getting in a yacht and they're going up and down the river, you know, showing the powers that be that, you know, there's a reason for these trees to be here. They're a good thing for the levees. They're not a bad thing, so on and so forth. He was able to get a 30-year moratorium on this stretch of the river from Steamboat all the way up to about where they end. And so they couldn't touch anything for 30 years. Didn't apply to the slough, but the slough didn't seem to be that much of a problem with the Corps. It was always the main river that they were interested in. But after the Katrina thing, and everybody's getting all wrapped around the axle about Katrina and the floods and blah, 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 this came up on their radar screen first because it hadn't been touched for 30 years. So it popped up on their radar that this needed to be addressed because we got a problem here, blah, 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 I haven't done this for 30 years. Well, it had a couple of divots, no question about that. But they came in here and this was called the 32.5 project, the 32.5 river mile. So they came in here and basically made this the poster child of levee repair. They dumped, I don't know what it was, 72, 75 loads of rock in this half-mile stretch, and put in just a huge amount of rock, and the price came to about $10.5 million just for that half stretch. And we often said to him, you know, if you had given us the $10.5 million, we could have went around this whole levee system on Sutter Island and repaired every darn thing out here 2 times over. But for your half mile, you know, this is what they did. So they did keep the trees for the most part. They took some of them out. And just an interesting side note, we had a tree right over here that had fallen over. It was an oak tree. It had been cut off, so they had about a 10-foot stump on it, but the tree ball was out and there was a divot down there. The powers that be could not make a decision on whether to pull that out and fill in the hole and landscape accordingly over the top of it, or they had to leave it there and work around that thing. There's, I don't know how many bureaucrats came down here to discuss that darn tree that had fallen over, and I kept telling them, take the darn thing out. Why do you want to work around a hole? Why do you want to work around that thing? It's going to rot away anyway. But they just couldn't come to a decision. So they finally said, you know, if that tree disappears, fine with us. So sure enough, we hooked up our tractor one Saturday afternoon, yanked that thing out of there, so we wouldn't have a divot. But that's how that went down, and it just would never cease to amaze me about how the bureaucratic mindset. Nobody wants to stick their neck out. Nobody wants to take any responsibility for this, that, or the other thing. You know. So
Well, you know,
anyway,
back in the
but we
40s
have
and
it.
50s,
Thanks to Bud, we have it.
the Corps of Engineers, they had kind of a special vessel that prowled up and down the main channel here. This out here in the river was a navigation, well, maintained, you know, they had lights along the way, etc. Waterway. And so the federal government had this, Corps of Engineers had this specially built machine that came along and did remove, trim, and what have you, trees. It would go nose in, it had a boom in the front of it and what have you, and they take out some of the bad things, which is seemed to me makes sense. There's nothing wrong with doing a little maintaining. But Bud's efforts, and I don't know how much his idea is in it, but down here from the beach down a ways, maybe how far down does that ledge go? Past your pumps.
Oh yeah, half a mile down.
Maybe a half a mile, quarter of a mile. But they built a ledge there and then rocked the ledge. And some people, like, I think she's gone, Janet, you know, the family who anchored for years just west of the beach, and they were disrupted because of this ledge that was built there, or whatever you're going to call it, and planted. and there are trees there, and that has been successful, I think. I mean, there's not been any maintenance done on that, has there, since it was done? And that was an idea of how to take care of giving some protection to the levee and putting the trees onto that ledge so if they did fall out, you know, during the floods, it wasn't taking a hole into the base levee, we'll call it, you know, the originally. And that worked out, but it's never been done anywhere
Well,
else
they
either.
did do it on this project. They did put a ledge out there,
Did they?
a bench, a bench, and that was part of that, all that rock.
I'm Doug Hamley.
It's a good way to do it.
This is my wife Kathy. We live here on the Delta. I grew up on the river. I have a little bit different perspective of Steamboat Landing than some of the other people that came down on boats. I'm a landside guy. The way it worked in the 60s, early 60s, late 50s, was before you turned 16 and got your license, the river was our highway. So from the time I was about 12 or 13, when my parents let me go in a boat, going up and down the river in the sloughs is what I did until the 4th of July. 4th of July ended and we all went into the orchards and harvested. So I had kind of an early experience along the river in Steamboat Slough, and then after you turned 16, and if you could get off in the evenings, you would come down and see who had gotten off the boat, that you could chat up a bit out here on the deck. So that was how we, you know, from my perspective, is how we interacted with Steamboat. And Steamboat was kind of the stopping spot. You knew everybody that lived here year-round, so you were always looking for an infusion of new interest. And so Steamboat was the place to come. After you turned 16, you know, you'd come down either as a kind of a pass-through moment, or there was also those occasions kind of after the boaters had gone back in the middle of September. Locals would still come here, and I remember one Saturday evening, probably, it was close to sundown, there was probably 50 of us in our cars standing around out in the parking lot. I don't think the store was even open at that time. And there was kind of a consensus of what are people doing tonight? And as wont to do when you're socializing, we all had beverages. And the local community sheriff pulled in, and we all disposed of our beverages behind our tires and this type of thing. And he looked around and realized that if he sat there and talked to us for the rest of the night, we weren't going anywhere. And he nailed the entire community to our fenders as we sat there and talked about things because nobody could leave. I always thought that that was pretty clever. The other thing is that the story that my wife tells about us when we were not even dating but kind of know each other. And why don't you...
All right, so my name's Kathy, and Doug doesn't remember this because it obviously wasn't important to him, but our first outing as a couple was here at Steamboat. I was working for his family as a summer job, and he invited me after work to go get a Sundrop soda, and they were very difficult to find, and we ended up here getting them in little flimsy paper straws that came out the top of the bottle, but
Upscale.
and it must have worked because we married 2 years later, just like you did. So Sundrop sodas.
The other thing, now that you brought up the Sundrop, is that I bought my first 21-year-old legal alcohol here. Yeah.
What'd you buy?
Bought a gallon of Red Mountain for 95 cents. And we didn't clear north end of Randall Island before the bottle was gone.
So Kathy, was lemon drop like a lemon lime thing?
Sundrop.
Sundrop.
Yeah, but, yeah, it was. But
Yes,
it-
but not effervescent like that. It was smoother,
tartar.
more like.
It was a high school after football practice, got the dry mouth. And so I got addicted for a while.
Dennis Leary, a near neighbor, born in 1930. So the first 10 years I don't remember at all really about anything here, but what I do remember is this beautiful young lady who rode the bus with me, and her name is Dolores Hendricks, and I brought the 46 Cortland Loprita the yearbook, and her picture's here. And then in the ads is the one that says Steamboat Landing, Texaco Services, H. Hendricks, proprietor, and groceries and fountain. And I remember it as a fountain, a store, restaurant, but only on this side of the levee. The gas stations pumped gas many years after that, but just talking a couple others here. The boats that lined the river and the slough were beautiful, large sailing boats, usually, I believe, and they came in the summer and seemed to stay in that same place the whole summer. And it's always interesting to watch what was happening. So that's about it.
The Texaco station, we have photos, maybe I've got them here, I'm not sure, but of it being a Texaco station, and you can see the Texaco sign in the background. And I'll leave it at that, and we'll see what happens with the Texaco station down the road here.
I think probably the only reason I remember her is that she must have smiled at me once. She was 2 years older, and when you got a smile from somebody 2 years older, you remembered.
Do you recall what class you were in high school relative to Bud or Phil Peck, either one?
They were quite a bit older.
Okay.
I was born in 30. I would guess that they were 8 years older,
Okay.
something like that.
So not in the same high school?
No, not at the same
4-year
time.
period, anyway.
But Dolores was. And I think they lived in the Collins house, where Stanley, the painter's widow, lives now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, Marty Stanley's
Stanley.
widow. Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Enver Salmon. I was born on Sutter Island in 1942 on the lower end. For excitement, this was the only place to be with Steamboat. Rode my bike up here, whatever it took to get up here. I remember the old store, mainly on the inside. The restaurant part of it, you can overlook the river. It was a shame that it wasn't able to rebuild that place. A lot of fond memories, meeting this gal here, Pat, and her family used to come up, and the greatest part, you knew when summer was, when the toot came up the river, and that was summer, started then. That's about it. Boat.
A boat or just boats in particular?
It was my family boat.
Oh, that's right. Can you talk a little bit more about what the inside looked like? Or what
Well,
was
I
it?
remember sitting, and you were able to look over the docks, and, you know, like, I don't know, it just had a long, seemed like to me a long, but I was talking about 3 or 4 years old. So things look a lot bigger.
One thing I'm confused about is several of you have said that there was a restaurant right here.
Yeah.
And what was the name of it?
Steamboat
Okay,
Landing.
okay, what was the one across the
Steamboat
way?
Landing.
Oh, okay, you can see why I was confused.
Just moved.
Named the same thing.
They call that a resort, the
Oh,
one on Steamboat.
Are you talking about
The restaurant
Steamboaters? Or are you talking over here?
over on Steamboat. Across the way, up above, where they built a house there now, but it was a restaurant.
That's Steamboaters.
Was it called Steamboaters?
Yeah,
Okay.
a restaurant.
Yeah, which was great.
Now, at one point, there's a photo, and it's called Axel's Landing, way back like in the 20s or something. So I don't have no idea who Axel was, but for the most part, as far as I know, it's always been called Steamboat Landing, operated by a variety of different people. I mean, there just was a whole bunch of people over its long history that operated Steamboat Landing. When I arrived on the scene, Ken and B. Swicker operated Steamboat Landing, and that was the building that was here before we put this one up. And it was they had a hard liquor license, and it was kind of like a little steakhouse and a hard liquor bar, and it had the little grocery store, and they seemed to have a really good reputation there about what they were doing and how they went. But what's that? What year was that? That was 57. So, but eventually, you know, they retired, and then it moved on to somebody else. But there was a lot of people that leased the place out that it was still called Steamboat Landing, except for Axel, whoever Axel was. So.
I'm Lorelei Ostman. My dad was Porky Ostman. He grew up right down the street, or right down the road. And in 1969, I just graduated from high school. And somehow Dad and Lucille Peck must have gotten together, because I was invited to come live here for the summer and work at the restaurant, the store, and the snack shop across the way. One of the things I remember is that Lucille expected a lot of hard work. And Tim was held to the same standard, and he'd come grumping through every now and then, and other times he was really excited and happy. And the clientele I saw that summer, a lot of Mexican workers. The crew buses would stop, and they'd pick up snacks and drinks and beverages, and
Lots of beer.
Lots of beer. But some of the Caucasian crews came through too, and because I just graduated from high school, I knew who some of those kids were, and they were in my class, and they took one look at me and said, "Oh, I'll get the Coke instead." So it was a great summer. It was a lot of hard work, and it was kind of fun to get to know more about where Dad grew up. I currently run the Hydrick Ag History Center, and we just changed our name to the California Ag Museum. It was just accredited last year by the American Alliance of Museums as the rarest collection of California ag artifacts in the world. We're having a real good time rebranding it, expanding. If you haven't been to the California Ag Museum for a while, stop by. It changes all the time. We have new things in there all the time. It's 90,000 square feet of museum, so we're always bringing things in, moving things around. And you'll remember, when I first walked in there, I could smell all the smells of Dad's barn, his shop. Remember what it was like when I was picking hops out in Slough House. It was just memories. And I've been there for 5 years now. And I'll probably be there for a while longer. Where is it? Woodland. First exit on I-5. It's open 5 days a week, Wednesday through Sunday. No, it's not free. We still have to pay for utilities.
Oh, my.
It's free to mom.
Yeah, it's free to mom, but I sort of put in a little bit of sweat equity there above and beyond the call. And we're really doing a lot to promote more about agriculture and the historical roots. And one thing we find over and over again, that growers and ranchers have a really strong work ethic. Not only did Tim and I grow up with that work ethic, but today people have the work ethic. And if you get the right docent tour going through that museum, doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, a kid, or an adult, you're going to start trying to figure out how your roots relate to agriculture. So come to the California Ag Museum, come out here to Steamboat Acres, because it's about our culture, our heritage, and how California began, and it really began long before the gold rush. It began in the 1700s when the rancheros were out here in the land grants and we were raising cattle, and then it slowly morphed into food growing and growers. And you know where we are today. Now we're trying to hang on to that culture and that heritage and promote the same type of values that we've all grown up with all our life, but may seem new to other people. So it's an honor being here, and it's an honor working at the California Ag Museum.
It is truly one of the best ag museums I've been through, and I've been through a few of them. So it's really good. Well worth your time.
Thanks, Tim.
Leslie Blodgett Ostman. Alvin Ostman Jr. was my husband. By the way, she's my daughter. Bud Peck and Porky, as my husband was known, and Jack Howard were the three musketeers. And I met my husband on a blind date with Jack Howard. And the next day, we went to a movie, I think. The next day, he brought me to Steamboat Landing. So that was quite an introduction. And yes, I remember somebody flying under the bridge too. I wonder who that was. The Ostman family were mainly into pears, and then some open crops. There were 8 children, 4 brothers and 4 sisters. His sister married my brother and moved to Slough House. And my family were hop-growing people. Did I mention the Ostman family home was here, where my husband was? This is a nice part of the country, but I'm glad I still live in Slough House.
Ostmans were our neighbors just about all the way around our farm. As Leslie said, their family farmed predominantly pears, as did we, and they also had open land row crops and that type of stuff. Great neighbors, great neighbors. We had a lot of good memories with our neighbors here, the Ostmans. And their house was not this one you're looking at, but the next one up is where one of the family members lived. And a couple others lived elsewhere. But I'm going to tell this little tale, so I hope Leslie's okay. In going through, Stanley Bud Peck was very much into photographs, into photographing things. With his camera, with his video camera, not a video camera at that point, but his little 8mm camera, and just taking regular shots, and he was pretty good at it. And so in going through all of those 8mm things, I didn't want them to go by the wayside. They're all on those little round, reel things, right? The little 8mm things. So I took them to a video place and had them all put on DVD. So in going through them, and I still need to go through there and edit out a bunch of stuff that really doesn't pertain to anything here, but Porky, Lorelei's dad, and Leslie's husband later, were extremely good friends all the way through, probably from grammar school all the way up through. And I'd see these two guys in these photographs, and they'd go on a lot of trips together, and they'd do this and they do that, and you could see they were in Alaska, they were in, I don't know where, but all over the place. But I noticed after a while that every time I saw those two guys, they were always with girlfriends. Very good-looking girlfriends.
Babes.
Babes. But I further noticed it was never the same one twice. So they had a good time.
It was a tradition for Bud and my husband Porky, after the harvest was done, to take a month tour of some place in the United States. And I believe the last one they took was to Alaska. And that was the last one.
Yeah, they took a lot of trips together.
So they were good buddies, yes.
Hi, I'm Janet Lovell. My maiden name was Stevens, and I'm flattered that Inver, who I've never officially met, mentioned that summer began when the toot arrived. As a kid, we started coming here in 1948, and so I was 4 years old. And I have come every summer since 1948 through now. We have our own boat, and we spent all those summers until probably about 1980, we got our own boat. And I have many, many fond memories of life here in the store. We call this the store rather than the landing. I do remember the little store on the other side of the levee that burned. When I was a little kid, we were here that summer. I'm guessing that was maybe 1948 I'm guessing that was maybe 49 or 50 that the little store on the other side burned. And that's the only recollection I have at all of anything called Steamboat Landing on the other side of the river. My grandparents on both sides, my father's parents and my mother's parents came here in the 1920s. And I have an article written by my grandmother of what life was like on Steamboat Slough, what it was like to leave San Francisco and sail up here. They spent a 2-week vacation in those days, and they were all sailboats. And they'd sail up, and one boat always had to have an engine in case there was no wind. And then that boat would tie all the other boats behind it, and they'd continue up so that they didn't lose their vacation. But the interesting thing about this article is, this was in Pacific Coast Yachting in 1926, I think, is life was no different for them here on the river than it was for me and my family, my brothers and my parents on the river. We did exactly the same thing. They talk about going, and somebody would go to Cortland and buy ice cream. There wasn't a store here. There was one difference in a sense that they had a relationship with the farmers. Like in the article, it talks about my mother going over the levee to the local farmer, who would have been the Pecks, and getting milk in a big thing, and then going up and down the river and giving milk to everybody on their boats. They would go get ice in Cortland. So life really wasn't much different. As kids, we got off the boat in the morning, we went to the beach all day long. And it was cool when I came in here today and I look and I saw the Monzos, because they were tied up maybe 2 boats down the river. Everybody had their own spots. And you never got in anybody else's spot. And that's still true today. And I look at this picture of the boats. This would have been in probably July, by the fact that we have sailboats here. All the sailboats came in July, and then they had to go back down to the bay to race in August. So the sailboats would leave, and the power boats would be left. And some of us got to spend the whole summer. Our boat would show up the day school got out, everybody get on board the boat and come. We'd leave the week of Labor Day. And there were we had friends from Sacramento, from Lodi, who all stayed all summer long. Probably there's around 12 boats that stayed the whole summer. And then the rest came, the sailboats came in July, and then a lot of power boats from the South Bay would come in August. And there might have been maybe 30 teenagers all hanging out together for 2 weeks at a time. And we met at the beach in the morning, water skied, then we all went back to our boats for dinner. Everybody came up to the store. We had to be back at our boats at 10 o'clock at night. That was the rule. So at 10 o'clock at night, you would hear, our parents were probably still awake. They would hear all the little skiffs going down the slough back to their boats. And that was the routine. And this is where, somebody said something about dancing. This is where we danced. It would have been essentially right here. There was a jukebox, and you had to walk through the bar, and there's some pretty sleazy characters in the bar. Right?
My daddy was one of those.
And the other person who was in the bar, Bunny Peck was the same age as I was, and her dad was Phil Peck, and they lived right past the crossroads down there, the first big house past the crossroads. And the house is still there. And Bunny still lives in a smaller house there. And she and I used to hang out together, and she'd stay at her grandma's house. Yeah. And we would meet, and she had a horse. We'd ride through the levee, through the orchards on the horse. But the local Mexican fellow who ran, who kind of was, he was a really old guy. His name was Cappy. And he kind of talked to all the workers and communicate. I don't know what his job was, but he lived down by the barn.
He was a ranch foreman.
Yeah, and Cappy would, and he would always be sitting in the exact same bar stool when we'd come into as teenagers, and you know he knew us, and you know he'd always say he called Bunny Bonifacia, and he'd always say hi to us when we came by, and he'd always sit in the exact same bar stool. So my parents always said, "Now don't talk to those guys in the bar." But you know, all the kids would run through, and we'd come out and spend the evening dancing and that kind of stuff. And then all the Sea Scouts would come. That would be a lot of fun too, because there were more people to dance with. In fact, you have a picture. There's with all the Sea Scouts all tied up. Sometimes there'd be 10 Sea Scout boats all tied up at the same time.
Yeah.
And all those guys would be in the store in the evening and on the beach. Yeah,
Talk about chaos. That was part of it.
it was a lot of fun. And I was sad that my own kids didn't get to enjoy that coming ashore business in the same way that we did. Because, pardon me?
They're good people.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. We met a lot of the local guys. I think I never met Inver officially. Maybe you were one of those guys. I remember some of the guys, the local guys, would come to the store at night. You know, we met. Who was it? Jimmy Sullivan was that his name, and Charlie McDowell would come.
Yeah. Went to school with all them.
So anyway, wonderful memories, and my grandchildren now come up every now and then, and they're just getting old enough to maybe spend a couple of days on the river with Grandma. Well, there was probably about 5 different people who ran the store. The Hendricks were the first, and then I remember Ken and Bee. And when Ken and Bee were here, they used to have an annual barbecue on the beach, and they'd have contests. They'd have a week where the most fish caught in a week, and they'd had a watermelon eating contest. They had a beauty contest. This is a picture of the winners of the beauty contest. The guys are not the winners. But the middle one is Janice Peck.
Oh, is it?
She won, and unfortunately she's not still alive. And then there were these 2 twins from Alameda called they were the Ironman twins, and they're standing there in their bathing suits.
So I'm going to have to ask you about this Ironman twin deal. Now, their grandfather usually had their boat tied up pretty much across from Mom and Bud's house, right in that area.
No.
No?
No. The Ironman
Down a
twins
little bit?
were part of the Alameda group, and the Alien Yacht Club sailboats always tied up out in the river.
Well,
And they were from
Whoever
Alameda.
it was, they had blonde twins. And, man,
This is
I was...
even before,
Is this before,
your
way
mother
before my
was
deal?
on the scene.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
it's not them then.
Yeah,
But
right.
there was a set of twins down there that I had just, you know, at that early age and that demeanor, just fell in love with those 2 twins. And if some of you, I'm sure, will remember that song.
Well, you're looking for the teenage girls that you
Yeah. But there was that song that said that you have to finally decide. You got to pick up on one and leave the other one behind. I don't know who did. I don't remember who did that song, but it was a really cute song.
I don't recall any twins, but this is my brother and my cousin. They won the fishing contest, and then they barbecued a bunch of stuff. And the kids who weren't here at the time of the barbecue, they'd all come and stay on other people's boats so that they could come back. Because the barbecue was in August, and these people in these pictures were sailors. They had to be down on the bay, but they'd come up and stay on other people's boats for that special barbecue in August that Ken and Bee used to always have.
Oh, you might have to reinstitute the August barbecue.
Yeah, we also remembered the ice house.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a thrill because you get really hot on the beach. So somebody'd come and buy ice, and whoever worked in the store had to come and open the ice house.
Right.
And so then all the little kids would run in the ice house and hang out while they were chipping the block of ice out. That would be one way to cool off.
There you go.
I'm Nudell Silva, and we lived in the house that was here before that burnt down, and our best fun here was swimming in the ditches. No, we couldn't go to the beach. We had to swim in the ditches.
Even the people off the beach used to go, we used to go down and get all muddy in the pear orchard and then play on the beach.
That's it. For
Swimming in
me.
the ditches.
So Adele, you lived in the house that they moved up here for Steamboat Landing? In that the two-story house that was right about in here?
Yeah, it's, but right in here, yeah,
Okay.
there. But it was, my mom and dad were, but they had lived here for, I don't know, 2 years, I think we did.
Because if you look in some of the older photographs, when the station was still over on, or the lane was still on the other side over there where the gas station is, you'll see kind of in the shadows, if you look close, you'll see a two-story home over here.
Yes.
And that two-story home was Steamboat, turned out to be Steamboat Landing number 2. They built this retaining wall here for the parking lot, and then they took that home and they moved it up. And part of the foundation of the home was that retaining wall, and that became Steamboat Landing number 2. And then in the 60s, Bud and my mom built the dining room on the north side of it to have a little more room inside and have a dining room and that type of thing. So that's that house that was right about out there somewhere got moved up here. So.
Okay, Pat?
We're back to Wayne.
No, I'm with her.
He was fire chief, and he's a very important person.
Kate?
He was.
Not back then.
Well, back then he fell in love with Liddell.
But he wasn't a fire chief then.
So she was a hot number.
Yeah, and they've been married. How many years have you been married?
57.
57 years.
Yeah.
Well, let's tell that story.
And then we've been friends with them
Them for
maybe a little longer.
longer than that. Yeah.
I fell in love with her brother. My sister fell in love with her husband. All that happened here at Steamboat.
We're all been
We've
friends
been friends
since.
ever since.
Did you meet here? When you say it happened here at
Oh.
Steamboat?
Well, I met Liddell's brother here,
Okay.
Mickey. Remember
Mickey.
Mickey?
Oh, Mickey, yeah.
Mickey Arlen, yeah.
And I was always told to shut up, be nice, cats down there.
Because I was special. Anyway, okay, we came up on the Miko, and the first year was 1940. Help me. Help me.
You want me to tell mine?
You tell yours.
Okay. I'm the older sister.
I'm the younger
And so
sister.
the first year that we came up to Steamboat on the Miko was 1946 or 7. And the store was on the other side of the river then. I don't really remember the store on the other side of the river. What I remember about it is the fire and that it was gone. And all that was left was the gas stock. And I have a picture of the stairs going up.
Yeah, I noticed the building's on in that photo.
Yeah, the building's out in that photo. And so we came up every year until 1957. We married in 1915. When did we get married? 1958. So yes, so the summer of 57 was my last summer. No, the summer of 58 was my last summer here. So we spent every single summer that I remember of my life, from the day that school got out in June until Labor Day weekend, we went home. And those are the most fond memories of my years of growing up, or my days of the summer at Steamboat. And the store, I remember the store, and the soda fountain, and the deck out here with the jukebox and the dancing. We had our first dance out here on the deck, and it's just a lot of fond memories. And my sister has a whole lot more to tell you.
We got in trouble a lot. Actually, we didn't. You raised yourself on the river. Mother Nature taught you. But when you're talking about the ice house, we were allowed in there just for so long because you were going to get pneumonia. Remember that? And I had all these things that I was remembering. But what we had, it was just free reign. I mean, like when we went in the orchards and got all muddy, and then we would give out the war hoop and cross the levee and down the beach and into the water, and everything turned to mud. The people from year to year, it was a family. And then the Sea Scouts, we would give them dances. But before the Sea Scouts, we were still younger, we would have talent shows in the basement. And we would go up and down the river in the slough with big signs held by bamboo. And it would say, talent show tonight at whatever time. And we would set up boards, I think it was, for benches. And then the pallets for the pair of thingies to stack on. And that was our stage. And all the kids had some kind of talent, and the parents were very generous and sitting there quietly. So when we got older, and then who was the girl that did all the artwork on the wall down there?
I don't remember her name, but somebody, she did.
They did this whole sketch on the white stuff. What do you call it?
Sheetrock.
Sheetrock. And they did it with chalk, and it was the whole river and slough and the bridge. It was really neat. But before that went up, when we were entertaining, we would, you have to feng shui the room, right? So we would take all the bamboo and cover the walls with all the bamboo. That's a lot of work. And then when the Sea Scouts came, there were only a few of us girls, and there were many, many, many Sea Scouts. And they would just line up and wait for a dance. It was cool. And then when the sand barges would go up and down the river, and we'd get in our dinghies and get out there and ride the swells.
The bear flag.
The bear flag, yeah, the bear flag was one of the main
Bear flag
ones.
made the best swells, right?
Yeah, I remember we'd see a tug coming, and everybody getting their dinghies, be ready to get the beginning of the wave.
Do you remember somebody had a surfboard, and we pulled that behind, and you had these old straw hats that we used to wear, and everybody would ride the surfboard.
Well, the swells have been.
And we had a dog that was actually born in a barn down further. And his name was Tippy, and he would chase boats like normal dogs chase a car, but he'd get in the river. And another thing Tippy did, you'd be down on the beach and everybody had their spot and you have your towels, and Tippy come lay next to you, and very quietly and gingerly he'd keep moving until you were totally off your towel, and you'd take it and go throw it in the river. We have, I could sit down and say all kinds of weird things that happened, and super, super good memories. It was wonderful.
I remember the first year that we were up here, the first couple years that we were up here, Bud Peck was so generous to let my father dock on his boat shed. We tied up to the boat shed. And then a few years after that, we tied up on the Sacramento Riverside about one space behind the boat shed. And we used to dock in the river, oh gosh, I think about half the years that we were here.
Yes.
And then the latter half of the years, say in the mid-50s, 53 to 59 or so, we were in the slough, like you said, a boat behind the two boats down. And those were our spots, and God help the person that got in there. Because I didn't do that.
I can remember one year too, it was a couple of years, Jack LaLanne would come, and he'd come with all of his beautiful women, and they would stand on the beach and do their thing, and they stayed in the meadows a lot. But I think he was very influential for a lot of us to be not body conscious, but health conscious. And so I remember Jack LaLanne.
You remember the rope that was always tied to the bridge?
Oh, yeah.
That's a rather key memory.
Yeah. And the bridge, we used to go down the levee, and there's these reeds that you can pick, and if you blow just right, it sounds like a sailboat horn. So we get outside the bridge tender's house and blow it. And we had it timed just right so we can climb onto the bridge and go up Well, this one time I jumped on the rope and went all the way up with that bridge. And I didn't really, you think the rope's over water, right? But when the bridge goes up, it's over a beach. It got very scary. So I only did that one time.
So Jack LaLanne would bring his entourage onto the beach over here?
Yeah.
Photo ops and all that?
Yeah, and then sometimes they would film, and I remember seeing him on TV, and he was saying, and we lived in the meadows where you could live naturally.
He would tie up to the gas dock, and they would stay. That's where he would tie up at the gas dock for the few weeks that he was here.
Did he remember what kind of a boat he had?
It was a wooden speedboat, maybe a Chris Craft. I think it probably was a Chris Craft. But yeah.
Yeah, so I can remember too, as far as the water skiing and all that through the years, we started out being pulled behind a 2.5 horsepower motor and a dinghy to an actual speedboat, and our first speedboat was a Higgins. Okay.
You guys had one of the first speedboats.
Yeah, we did.
Very fancy.
We did. We were very fancy.
And then we had a Chris Craft. We had the Higgins and the Chris Craft.
Yeah. Yeah, those are fun times. So it was teaching everybody how to water ski. Yeah.
And,
Beverly, do you have any more?
Oh, yes. My story, Beverly Mendoza, Monzo Mendoza. This is mine was a very special place in the world because it's where I met my husband, Joe. My sister introduced him to me right here out on the corner, right by the bridge house where the two roads come together. And so we met there. And 2 years later, we were married. And we've been married now, coming this September 2nd, will be 57 years. So, yeah. We're Steamboat. Yeah, and that's how our life all began.
Joe?
My name is Joe Mendoza. I was raised in this area. I haven't that much to do, but we used to go to church to Walnut Grove. Just drive by Steamboat, and there was always a lot of people around here having a good time. And we started going. This was the only place we could come. I graduated out of Cortland High School in '56. Dwayne and I did, and that's our story. And I worked for Debbie's family for, gosh, I don't know, until I got out of high school, and then I left. That was my story. Then I met her. And Enterprise, known as his little baby. He grew up with my brother, so it's always been great to come by Steamboat. I'm glad that they're rebuilding. This is our only place that we could come and have a good time. It was really nice.
Wonderful memories.
Good luck and good luck on your.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
It was really something to have all those cruisers waiting to take off, and they would take off one at a time, and then they were timed at strategic places until they got to the Sacramento Yacht Harbor, and then they had a huge party. I just remember one particular year. Do you remember if it was just the 1 year or more?
What, did we have the all-girl crew?
Oh, yeah, you had. Oh, yeah. And the Miko had an all-girl crew.
I don't know what you were thinking of. But,
Did they have a race before or after that? Was that?
I don't know. I think, to my memory, that was the only race I remember, was when we had the all-girl crew. But I know, and they were all power boats, no sailboats.
No.
But they would start here at the dock, Sacramento. I mean the steamboat, gas dock, and go to the Sacramento Yacht Club. Yeah, and it was a beautiful thing to see. All those beautiful yachts going up.
Those boats all came a couple of days before the race.
Yes.
And there wasn't enough room on the river to tie up, literally, so they would be
go
like
3 and 4 deep.
Yeah, some of them would be 6 deep.
Yeah.
Just waiting because there were so many boats in that race. I
Yeah,
had
it was
no
huge.
concept. Must have had 50 boats easy.
Yeah.
And so the starting thing took forever because each one had to
Exactly.
start, and then they timed them. I guess that's how you kept track of it. So you figure
Our
50
boat,
boats starting.
somehow, our boat ended up, because they didn't fill the tank before we tied up to the bushes and stuff, and so condensation got into the gas tank. The Miko I don't know how far up the river they got, but it started it didn't want to go. It just hobbled all the way in. But the girls, the women got it in. And I remember too that a bunch of us kids, because they were having the adult party at the big party, and we went to the state fair. Remember that? And we were all given $1 each for the whole day at the state fair. That was to get in, and I'll never forget that. Anyway, we took the bus in.
Can't even get near it now.
I know, $1 each.
I don't even think they charge. Not to get in, you just went.
Oh. I think they did. I think it was a dime to get in or something. Anyway, that's just another story.
Because of Steamboat Landing, we have our most fond memories of our childhoods growing up. I wish other children could share those memories and have memories as wonderful as ours.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that Steamboat Landing is going to revive and be again. I'm sure it'll be a wonderful, big success.
My name is Chuck Clausen, and I've had the privilege of boating and water skiing on the Delta since about 1955. I've probably skied on every slough in the Delta at one time or another, and I can honestly say that I know why people came to Steamboat Slough area, because after skiing on many of these other sloughs, Steamboat Slough is a great recreational resource and probably the prettiest place in the whole Delta, without question, as far as I'm concerned. And anyway, my boating experience started at Vieira's in about 1955 when I started my first ski, and then in the 60s, the early 60s, I had an opportunity to put together a little box racing boat, and I had a partner in it, Jack Shadding, who lives down in Walnut Grove, and we would tow the boat up to Sid's up here on Steamboat, and we would ski up and down Steamboat Slough here and frequent the gas pump out here like a lot of people did, I'm sure. And every once in a while we would even ski through here with all the anchored out boats. We won't get into those conversations, but they were pretty interesting. Whenever we would get tired of skiing, we'd go up to the Minor Slough Bridge and climb up to the top and jump off of the bridge. And it's just a lot of things to do. But even today, my family, we've been up here about 25 years over on Steamboat Resort, and we get to enjoy the wonderful sunsets that you get with the sun dropping down between the oak trees, and watching the bridge light up at night from the sunset. There's no better spot on the Delta than Steamboat Slough.